Okay, so welcome to today's showcase. Today we have a kind of unique setup. All of the stuff I've done this weekend is fairly unique in structure in and of itself, as well as the showcase itself is very unique. We have a fully edited video today. I have pre-arranged all of the clips, so that is to say all of the visuals today are pre-recorded. I can do nothing as of the current moment to alter that footage unless I re-recorded it, so I'm going to be completely upfront about that just because I don't think there's any point in hiding it. What you're seeing right now is me probably an hour and a half ago, just messing around, throwing out some spells and attacking this dude and walking through his steam clouds. So nothing you haven't seen before there, nothing you have to worry about there, completely usual stuff. What you are going to see today is actually pretty new as far as Verdict development goes. We've been focusing a lot on AI and mob kind of related stuff, which is to me a really interesting concept, and we're going to go through some Boyd related things at the end too, or I guess in the middle, which is in my opinion, one of the most interesting things in this video. But before we get to that point, I want to show off what I've done with mobs just on their own, and in a second here we're going to see that. The first of which is idling. So previously, we had these very crude behaviors where the mob would just dart off in one direction and then start running there, and then it would stop occasionally, and then it would run, and then so on and so forth. They were very rudimentary creatures, and still are, in fairness, but previously it was made in a time when I was a very quote-unquote young coder, and they were very immature as far as AI intelligence goes. That crawler you can ignore. They have collisions turned off for the moment just because I wanted to see their behaviors and nothing else. I didn't want them mashing their face against a wall, but what they're doing right now and what I'm pointing out with my mouse on screen is they have these turning angles now. So they don't just dart in one direction anymore, they instead kind of move gradually into that direction instead of simply turning and immediately walking that way. They also have randomized idle times and randomized walk times, randomized angles, randomized speeds. So each of them has their own unique personality, quote unquote personality. What you're seeing right now is this mob has been given a painfully, pitifully high or low turn rate. So it's actually incapable of touching me because of that speed, which almost looks like an orbit. This isn't super practical, but my idea that I have in my head is that if I wanted to, because of course the faster you go, the harder it is to turn, just as a factor of, physics, I suppose, I think it would be very cool to have certain mobs that are very fast, but turn very, unfortunately, they just can't really turn at all, despite being able to catch up to you in like a split second. What you're going to see in a second, too, is a more realistic example of this, where the turn rate is much more usual. What I've done here, too, is interpolated their positions, so similar to projectiles, they actually don't have much impact on the server themselves, which is fantastic, of course. And you can see it kind of orbit around me now, too. I'm helping it out, but the whole idea there is that they're more smooth, they look a lot smoother, they're interpolating a lot more. Next up is combat. So combat aggro in particular is something that we have never had before with NPCs. So the reason I'm swiping my mouse here is because I'm trying to show off its normal aggro range and then compare it to what I'm experiencing right now. So when you hit it with a fireball, for instance, in this case, I've actually given it memory. So it memorizes who has hit it before and how hard they've hit it, and it will keep track of that for a certain amount of time depending on how hard they hit them. So if you hit it pretty hard, then as you can see here, it's pretty pissed about that, so it's going to chase you down. And that's a pretty intelligent mechanic that I was very proud of because, as you can see again, it's chasing him down almost relentlessly, and it will continue to do that for quite a while. And you can compare this to our previous behavior and see we didn't really have one. It doesn't care at all when you hit it with a fireball. It might look a little bit like that, but it sincerely wasn't. So as a sort of segue into this, these Boyds, if you don't know what Boyds are, they're a very common instrument, you could say, in computer science. Boyds are a very simple simulation of flocking behavior, and you can probably see that already. It looks sort of like a school of fish or like a flock of birds. This is a pretty rudimentary, very basic and crude example or implementation, simulation, whatever. But it does, show off that it's possible in Velocity, and I'm pretty happy about that. What these do, to give you a very basic rundown of how Boyds work, they look at their surroundings, they look at their nearby Boyds, their neighborhood of Boyds, their friends and everything like that, and they determine, this guy next to me is moving in this direction, I also want to move in that direction, right? And then he kind of bumps up close to them, so they move away a little bit so they maintain this distance between themselves. And then there's another rule and a couple others that are very basic and even more simple to understand than that, so I won't go over them, but Anyway, that's the idea, right? These three simple rules, 2 to 3 simple rules, create this interesting flocking behavior, and it's not super useful ordinarily, but the reason I'm showing this off and the reason I'm explaining this and the reason I did it in the first place to test if it was possible was I think that it would be very cool to have this sort of play into herding behavior for NPCs. What I mean by that, and I can give you an example of what I mean, it's going to cut back to the gameplay footage in a second here, but either way, what I mean by that is, take for instance boars, right? Say we want boars to maybe not be alone, right? Maybe the golems are always alone, maybe the crawlers are always alone, so we want a little bit more of a challenge for the boars because they are the lowest tier mob, right? So if we want them to be in a herd, I don't necessarily have to define, this herd has 3 or 4 boars in it, and this one has 2, and this one has 17, or whatever else. If I put them in as a Boyd system, as a Boyd simulation, it is literally as simple as just saying, hey, okay, now we are going to simulate these boars as Boyds, and they're just going to run around and interact with others and group up if they want to, or split off if they want to. I got a little carried away, but this is a little bit more boring, to me at least. We just kind of restructured some of the harvesting tree in the mastery window, so we now have the gentle touch and third harvesting mastery that I was talking about last showcase, and as you can see, or as I'm demonstrating now, you can't bypass it without surplus, so this is just showing off a multi prereqed mastery node. It's not super special, but I felt like it was worth showing off anyway. There were a bunch of other bugs with it that I fixed as well. So, there's a myriad of stuff in there that I fixed, but it's too unseen to go over, really. After this, I'm going to go over all of the different spell icons in general. I've reskinned plenty of the harvesting masteries just because I wanted to get the color right. I also reskinned a ton of the masteries again, just because I thought that some of the existing ones were a little bit too weird in terms of color or whatever else. And as you're going to see in just a second here, I was also already in the mood for doing this because I mentioned a couple showcases ago, I think 2 showcases ago, that I wanted to redo all of the existing elemental spell icons, and I did do that. So this is what I'm showing off here. I have completely redone all of the existing elemental spell icons. So I showed last showcase that I'd done that for Essence and some of the other spells, and I've now completed that with Wind and Water and everything else done, Fire, so on and so forth, Earth. Now they all have their corners, and some of the ones that were a little bit weirder, like Tectonic Shell or Dust Devil, have been replaced by more ordinary-looking spell icons. I'm right now just showing off those in the spell wheel. I accidentally clicked the tab there. But you can see they look a lot better, in my opinion. Like Dust Devil fits the tree quite a bit, and it doesn't look as kind of jarring. Previously, it was from a different spell book, or pack, whatever, one of the ones I purchased. So now I think it's more cohesive and it's a little bit less, like I said, jarring. Other than that, I think that's everything for the spell slots. So if you aren't into the boring code stuff, I recommend you check out now. I'm just going to be kind of talking about that stuff as we go ahead, and at the end I might talk a little bit about the new base that's coming in sometime soon, or rather the tweaked new base. Either way, I assume everyone that doesn't like coding and stuff is gone now, so I'm going to go ahead and shift gear into that. So what I'm showing you right here is one of the most important pieces of code in the entire game. This is the network manager, and what I'm selecting right now is the top half of the network manager. This is all of the client packet functions in the entire game, wholeheartedly, in one section. Now, this isn't inherently bad, and just so you know, the server packet functions are all in the bottom half. Now, this setup, where you have all of the client packet functions and all the server packet functions on the bottom and top, respectively, or I guess counter respectively, that works okay, right? If you have maybe 20, 30 packet functions, it works perfectly, genuinely perfectly. But if you have hundreds, thousands of lines, you can see here what I've done instead, right? It's a lot more manageable. And the reason for that is because I've bundled them into what I call bundles, or packages, whichever you prefer. So the reason that this is a superior method is because previously, if I have a packet on the client to request info from the server, then a packet on the server to request or to send that info to the client after it has been requested, then those two functions could very easily be on the opposite side of the file from each other, which means that I spend probably 5 to 10 seconds looking for them, and I do that every single time I want to find one, right? Even if I use some shortcuts, it's still going to take quite a bit of time. This way, I can have these individually marked bundles of packets that are neatly, marked and stacked and organized, and they're still in progress, but for the most part, I think that they're very well put together. I just need to kind of jostle them around so that the spells are close to the masteries and so on. But it's going to cut to Boyds in a second, but I'm going to go ahead and keep going. Anyway, that network manager was just hell to go through. Like I said, 5 to 10 seconds every time I wanted to find a packet function. So the new method allows me to skim very easily. It allows me to examine whatever I need to examine without much, overhead on that part. And frankly, it completely revolutionizes how I go through that file daily. It's, again, the most used in the entire game and the most updated in the entire game. So it's really important that something I use probably 20 times a day, if not more than that, by a fair margin, depending on, how I'm doing in a certain day. That's really, really critical. I also want to mention that the mobs, I very briefly made note of the fact that they now interpolate like projectiles do. That's partly related to the fact that they don't have collisions turned on. Ordinarily, I can't simply just set their position. If I set their position, then it doesn't allow for collision. But that's a very simple problem to solve. It's just something I have to work around when I get the time. For right now, though, I wanted to perfect their movement before I worried about collision and all that stuff. And frankly, they probably don't even need it that bad, because I can simulate it easy enough by just preventing them from walking over walls. As you can see here, they don't collide with each other either, which is, again, a consequence of not having a set position, or rather having set position used instead. Again, though, that's simple enough to replicate. I can simply prevent them from crossing with other mobs, so I'm not too worried about that. Whatever the case, I think today was a pretty good success. I'm very happy with how the edited video turned out. I'm not sure how you guys will feel about that, but if you hate it, let me know. If you love it, let me know. I'd love to hear that too. Either way, I hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you guys look forward to the next one. Let me know your thoughts. Have a good day.